Good evening and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us on the 2020 edition of Connect and Elect. I'm your host and moderator, Suzette Speaks. We're going to give everyone a chance to come on in slowly. This is our first of 4 different forums where we're going to bring you our local candidates so you can hear more about where they stand on the issues. This is not the first time we've done this. We've done this for several years. And of course, without you, none of it would be possible. So we really want to thank you, our guests. We have a lineup here for you tonight. Several of the candidates that are running for sheriff of Broward County will be joining us. Of course, we all invited all of those who qualified on time. Not everyone accepted, but we want you to know off top that we did invite each and every candidate who qualified for this race. So Connect and Elect is the political forum that is brought to you by 2 outstanding group of women. If you didn't know, the powerhouses who put this forum together are Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, and in specific 2 chapters that I want to mention, specifically the Coral Springs chapter, which is Chi Psi Omega, and the Pompano Beach chapter, which is Kappa Kappa Omega. And they have joined forces again with the ladies of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, more specifically the North Broward Alumnae chapter. So we are very grateful that these women saw fit to make sure you stay informed and who is running in the sheriff's race, of course, with policing being front and center right now. We want to know who wants to be the top cop of Broward County. So for over 100 years, these 2 organizations, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority, as well as Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, have worked and advocated to educate constituents about the issues that directly impact our local communities. They have combined in terms of service, not only from Pompano, as well as North Broward and Coral Springs, but you will find active chapters in Coconut Creek, Tamarack, Lauderhill, Margate, and Deerfield, and of course, other parts of Fort Lauderdale. So we are here to serve you, and this forum is just one of many different activities both organizations put together to make sure our body politic stays informed. So the purpose of tonight, of course, you know, we have an August primary coming up. So we wanted to do these forums nice and early so you could get to know the candidates. There's no level of government that does not impact our lives, particularly local government has a huge impact on each and every American, each and every resident right here in Broward County. So you're here because what? You want to learn more about both who is running and the job that they're going to hold. So we're going to educate you a little bit, give some more people some time to to come online. We also wanted to make sure we are trying to hold those who want to hold public office accountable. Of course, everybody has great ideas, but we wanted to be able to bring those live and direct from each and every candidate. So as we give people time to join us on tonight's forum, I'm just going to give you a few dates and some information on how to vote. This year is so pivotal. So we want to just let you know, again, we're nonpartisan here. We want to make sure everybody's voice is heard. So while we're letting some more people come on board tonight and join us in our audience, again, thank you guys for logging in. We want to let you know where you can register to vote. And I'm going to give you that website really
when
quickly.
they actually start the meeting.
We're going to mute someone is talking in the background of somebody's office. That's okay. That's what happens with Zoom. But we're going to give you some info before we go to the candidates. And the first important web address we want to give you is how to register. Have you registered to vote? We hope so. But if you have not, you can go to register2voteflorida.gov. Easy. Register2voteflorida.gov. And you can register there. All you need is a driver's license or other state ID and the last 4 digits of your social. So you can go directly online and you can register to vote. How do you know if you're eligible to vote? Yes, this has been a question that's presented. So we just want to reinforce that you do have to be an American citizen. Permanent residents are not allowed to vote. You do have to be a U.S. citizen. You also have to be a legal resident in the county in which you desire to vote. So make sure you are registered with the post office, of course, and you have to be at least 18 years old to vote, and you can pre-register at 16 years. I bet you didn't know that. That's new. So you can pre-register to vote at 16 years old, imagine. And of course, you must be at least 18 years old to vote here in the US, all right? And with a caveat, you may not be a convicted felon without having your right restored. We know that Florida had some brand new legislation that went into effect. So you may be a convicted felon, but you may have the opportunity to get your rights restored. So make sure you look into that. So the deadline to register is July 20th. Mark your calendars. The deadline to register for this election and be able to vote in the primaries is July 20th. So make sure you take that step. We also wanted to give you some information about how to vote by mail. It's super important for some of our more mature adults and those who have other conditions that will prevent them from going to the polls. This is a great option. So make sure you go ahead and request your ballot. You can go to www, for those of you in Broward County, www.broward.SOE. That stands for Supervisor of Elections, SOE.org. And you can request your ballot, your mail-in, vote by mail ballot there. Or if you prefer to speak to someone, you can call. And you see the number up on our screen. It's 954-357-7050. 954-357-7050. So you can please order that, right? Things to remember, you have to sign it before you send it back. We obviously want your vote to count. Sometimes we get so excited and we put it in the mail, but we don't sign it. So you have to remember when you're sending it back, once you received it and you voted, you must sign that ballot, of course, okay? So you will get your ballot sent to you about 7 to 10 days. Or if you don't order it, someone, if you need assistance, may call on your behalf to order it. So make sure you leave enough time, guys. So once again, track your ballot, www.browardsoe.org at the Supervisor of Elections website. We also wanted to tell you about the first election that you're gonna see, which is the primary election. Super important. If you're registered with a party in Florida, you will be able to participate in the primary August 18th. Everyone can vote. We're going to talk about some of the other candidates coming up and let you know what forums we have coming up next week and the week after. But circuit judges, county judges, school board, it's open primary, regardless of party affiliation. Several of the offices can be voted for, even if you are an NPA, non-party. All right, so primaries are August 18th. Only registered Democrats and Republicans can vote for certain positions, such as the sheriff, who we're gonna meet tonight. One of you will become sheriff, legislators, public defender, and more. So it kind of pays sometimes to be a part of the party. If you're not, there are certain races that you won't be able to participate in. So check that out. MPAs, you are ineligible to vote in the primary. To vote in the primary, you must update your registration status by July 20th, all right? So MPAs, make up your mind. You will have the opportunity to join some of these races. All right, we also wanted to tell you, and thank you again for joining.
Uh-oh.
No, she went on.
It froze up.
Yeah, looks like we lost Suzette.
Hmm? It's good.
Who's that?
Mm-mm. Okay.
All right, so I'm gonna sit here and do the questions. Y'all still setting me up, but anyway. Okay, and,
So grateful again. Sorry, we're having a little bit of a technical
Trace?
there. Good night. So we did open this invitation and we've called several times to make sure everyone could participate. We'll emphasize that again. If you're not seeing your candidate, that's probably why. But of course, we're very, and I noticed it's all gentlemen. I'm very excited to have all these gentlemen on our forum tonight. So what does the Broward Sheriff's Office do? Let's talk a little bit about the responsibility. So Broward Sheriff's Office is responsible for providing law enforcement services that commute to communities that don't have their own municipal law enforcement forces. So the Broward Sheriff's Office also coordinates with municipal police to assist in cases as well as provide Broward County elected officials with law enforcement information. To run for Broward Sheriff, each and every one of the candidates must reside in Broward County. And if you didn't know, the sheriff serves for a 4-year term. So we're gonna jump right into our introductions. Like I said, we have invited all of the candidates and several distinguished gentlemen did take us up on our offer to be here tonight. We are grateful to them and we are going to meet them in no particular order now. So I'm going to start with, and we've randomly selected who is gonna go first. You're gonna tell us your name. You can tell us a little bit about your experience and why you're running for office. And perhaps if you have time in that 60 seconds, we're gonna give you a 10-second grace period. You could also tell us what most is pressing to you and what issue you care about the most. So we will start with Mr. Al Pollock. Good evening, sir. Can we hear you? You can unmute yourself.
Yes, I did. Can you hear me now?
Now I can. Welcome, sir. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much. And I just want to thank all of the other candidates that are here. You have a distinguished list of guests here. And let me start off by saying my name is Al Pollock. I retired from the Broward Sheriff's Office in 2017 after spending more than 35 years there. I started out as a patrolman. I've been a resident of Broward County and a Democratic voter as long as I was eligible, enough to vote, when I got of age. And I love the Broward Sheriff's Office. I have a passion for it. I love the community that I served, throughout my tenure there. And I want to continue to do that. With the support of the people in Broward County, I will continue. I want to build that trust back up in our community that we have so much lost, throughout the tragedies around the country and all. So with that said, I have the experience, the knowledge, and I can get the job done.
Thank you. You had 10 seconds left, but thank you very much and welcome, Mr. Pollock. All right, next up, we have Mr. Charles Chuck Watley. Welcome, sir.
Hey, how you doing? My name is,
welcome.
good to see everybody here. And I welcome everybody and I thank you for participating in this event tonight. My name is Chuck Watley and I'm running for the position of Broward County Sheriff for this upcoming 2020 election. And I am registered as a non-party affiliate. What that means is I do not belong to a particular side, Democrat or Republican. In my heart, I belong to God and all the people of Broward County, not just one party. It has always been a problem for 30 years when you had candidates in the past and they would pander to one side or the other. So I am here for everybody. I grew up in Broward County, living on Northwest 8th Avenue, and attended William Dandy Middle School here in Broward County and Fort Lauderdale High. Ran track, played football. And to help support my family at 14, I used to work at the Pick and Pay at 27th Avenue and Broward Boulevard. So I was raised here. This is my home, and I love my home. And that's why I am running for Broward County Sheriff, to take care of my home and the people I love who are my family. Thank you. Everybody there? I think Susan froze up.
Yeah, I think she froze again.
Susan? Did I speak that good that she couldn't move? No. Susan?
Thank you.
Two Willie Joneses here.
So Willie, it says you're the host now, so have at it.
You guys really don't want me to host this. That will be an unfair advantage. That will be everybody but me.
Suzette, you're muted.
Can't hear you.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Watley,
Hello?
thank you for that introduction. We appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome.
All right, and next we have up Mr. or Sheriff Gregory Tony. Welcome, Sheriff Tony.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Good to see you again, Suzette. Thanks for the opportunity to participate. First of all, I'll start off with, I am Sheriff Gregory Tony, a little over 19 months almost now. I had the pleasure of being appointed the first African-American sheriff in the agency's history. Much of it was as a byproduct of systematic and institutional failures in the agency related to safety protocols, lack of leadership. And I've been able to come in and introduce a lot of things to enhance those security issues. We went from an agency that failed an active shooter to having the most comprehensive active shooter training protocols and systems in place in the United States, not just here in Florida. But I also had to examine how do we reallocate and use the citizens' monies in a more responsible manner. And by doing so, I reallocated over $60 million, building a state-of-the-art real-time crime center where we can track over 10,000 camera systems across 256 of our schools. We broke ground on a state-of-the-art $30 million training center. And then we also had to look at what can we do to increase the diversity within the agency. And I'm pleased to say, having promotions, I've created the most diverse command staff in over 105 years.
Time, Sheriff. Thank you. Time. Thank you, sir. Our next candidate that will be stepping forward is Mr. H. Wayne Clark. Wayne Clark. How are
Hi,
you,
Suzette.
sir?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. Thanks everyone for attending. Real brief. Wayne Clark, running for sheriff, obviously, and as a Republican in Broward County, which is tough. Most of the gentlemen in the race have been Republicans at one point for most of their lives. I think Al Pollack is probably the only one that wasn't. I'm not sure about Mr. Jones. But that being said, I'm a businessman in the area. I have zero law enforcement experience. But what I do have is an advisory board of local, state, and federal law enforcement, as well as other people on my board, ex-military. And I believe that if you look at the Broward Sheriff's Office and you look at the size of the agency, it needs to be run more like a business. It needs to be run more efficiently. There's more to Broward Sheriff's Office than just law enforcement. And with that being said, I look forward to discussing everything throughout the forum tonight. Thank you, Suzette.
Thank you, and pleasure meeting you, sir. Our next candidate up is Mr. Raymond L. Hicks.
Yes, good evening, everyone. How's everybody doing?
Good to have you, sir.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for this opportunity, Ms. Suzette. First and foremost, I just want to tell each and every last one of you all that I love you, and I truly thank God for this opportunity. I actually joined the Broward Sheriff's Office back in 1986 as a detention officer. I went into the Crossover Academy in 1996. And of course, my whole admiration and respect for law enforcement started at the age of 7. I grew up where there was stabbing, cutting. My mom was shot. My dad went to prison. So what inspired me to actually go into law enforcement was actually make a difference and change the camaraderie, within the agency to build to bridge the gap between the community and law enforcement. And it's unfortunate, that I've gone through a situation, me and my wife and kids. I've been married now for 34 years. Of course, I've been a resident for almost close to 40 years. I started coming here back when I was about 13, 14 years of age in Fort Lauderdale. So to be honest with you, one of the reasons why I'm running is I just want to make mention of the fact that this is my book title, I'm Still Standing. And I get into it at a later date, but
yes, sir.
I'm running for
yes, sir. Your time has elapsed.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hicks. Sorry about that. That timer can get catch up on us. All right. Next we have Scott J. Israel. Is he on? I don't see him. Okay. And Mr. Willie Jones.
Good evening. How are you doing?
Good evening.
I'm Willie Jones. I have approximately 40 years in law enforcement. The reasons I'm running is because I'm passionate about public safety and our community. I've been in the business for about 40 years, and I've witnessed the blindfold of Lady Justice slowly being raised. It's been raised to the rhetoric of special interest group, special political favors. It's been raised to people who really don't have our community's best interests at heart. The reason I'm running, we need to get back to real policing. We need to get back to law enforcement. We need to protect our most vulnerable citizens of this community. That's the elderly and the children. We need to bring in change that will make our agency and our community safer for our citizens, for our visitors, and for our businesses. Now,
Your time has elapsed.
That was a quick.
Thank you. Yes, I gave you 5 extra seconds. All right. So I'm gonna lay down the rules. I know you gentlemen will be fine with adhering to them, but I just want our guests, and again, welcome to each and every person who has joined us here on Connect and Elect, the Forum series. This is the first of 4. Of course, we're going to have several others coming up next week, the week after, every week of June, in fact, to talk not only to our sheriff tonight, but to several other groups of candidates so you can be informed on who you would like to elect come this August, all right? So the gentlemen have introduced themselves. Again, I'll say it again, all candidates were invited, those who qualified. So if you don't see anyone here, it's not because they were not invited. Of course, we want it to be fair across the board. So all candidates who qualify were invited. So the rules are, did we just have a candidate join? Scott Israel, did you come on? If you can unmute yourself, sir, I'm going to continue with what the rules are.
Okay.
Mr. Israel?
Yes, can you hear me, ma'am?
I can. You can turn your camera on when you're ready. We've just had introductions. And you have 60 seconds, sir. You may introduce yourself and what we laid out as the general parameters, which is tell us about yourself, your experience, and what your goals are for the office if you're ready.
Thank you. I apologize for the technical difficulties, but my name is Scott Israel. I am the twice elected Democratic Sheriff for Broward County. We were reelected in 2016 with 600,000 votes. That was Broward County's community's way of saying, well done to the Broward Sheriff's Office. We kept young people out of jail like never before through the civil citation program. We were able to get involved in a rights restoration program. We partnered with the school board in the Promise program. Civil citations were made mandatory by me. And then we had a tragedy of monumental proportions at Stoneman Douglas. The situation was horrific. There's no leader in the world that could have controlled what happened that day.
10 seconds, sir.
Broward County understands that. And I'm asking that we reclaim our stolen vote, that as a community, we reclaim our stolen vote and tell Tallahassee that if Scott Israel were a Republican, not a Democrat, he would have not have been suspended. And I'm asking to get reelected in August. Thank you.
Your time has elapsed. Thank you very much. And we thank you for joining us. So now we have a total of, I believe it's 7 candidates of the total that have all been invited. And we're very excited because we have some tough questions to pose to you. I'm sure you all can handle it. So how is this format working tonight? So we have a strict adherence to time. I know it's a little bit difficult because we're on Zoom, but we'll make adjustments. So after your opening statements, we will start in the same order with each and every question. We have about a total of, I think each of you might get 2 to 3 questions each. So once you have your question, the candidate who is given the question will have 2 minutes to respond to the question. Then each of the other candidates will be given a 30-second rebuttal. So once again, if the question is posed to you, you have 2 minutes to respond, but each and every candidate will be given their after 30 seconds for rebuttal. Candidates should not answer simply yes or no. If you can avoid it, obviously we want to hear your thoughts and ideas on the issues. We have the questions predetermined. We're going to actually give you some background on various issues that we've researched to make sure that we've outlined why these questions are a concern for us and the citizenry of Broward County. If there is enough time, we will take questions from the audience. So you can go ahead and pose those, ladies and gentlemen. Everyone out there, thank you again for joining us on this forum. You can pose those questions and we will kind of screen them. They will not be on the screen for everyone to see, but we will see them. So don't worry if you don't see your question, we will see your question. Questions will be randomly selected. And again, each candidate will be given a 30-second closing remark. All right, so we again are very grateful to have, in the same order, the questions now ready for you. Are you ready, gentlemen? All right, ready or not, here we come. So, Mr. Al Pollock, we'll start with you, sir. You got the draw of being the first candidate up tonight. So I'll begin with some background and ask you the question. In cities and towns across the country, the recent tragic deaths of Black youth in confrontation with police have sown a wave of distrust for law enforcement. While perception is not fair to the vast majority of dedicated, well-meaning law enforcement officers, it has shaken the connection between the law enforcement community and the neighborhoods they serve. The question is, what measures would you implement to bridge the gap of distrust between law enforcement and the community? Mr. Pollock, you have 2 minutes.
First of all, let me start off by saying what happened to Mr. Floyd and also Mr. Brooks is a tragedy. And I just want to, give my utmost, condolences, to their families. First of all, in this country and in this county, law enforcement have lost the trust of the community. That's number one. 99.9% of all law enforcement officers come to work to do the right thing, to serve our community in any way possible. But you always, in any professional, gonna have that little 1%, But with that said, we have to do a better job. And when I'm saying we, the sheriff's office has to do a better job. What I would do is, I would start off with the pre-selection process. That's number one. I would have a civilian sitting in on my oral board. The questions that the Broward Sheriff's Office are currently using, they've been using those questions for the last 20 years since I used to work there, and it's still ongoing today. We need to tailor the questions more toward the community, problem-solving questions, not some type of math question or some type of question where you are in a high school setting. So that's number one, the pre-setting. You also need to get more involved with the psychologists and have them in there to determine also, to be a part of that board. Pre-selection means a lot because once they get in, it's kind of hard, to get them out until something happens. Nobody is perfect, and I understand, we're gonna make some mistakes, but at least we do our best moving forward. We put our best foot forward. That's number one, the pre-selection. Also, I think once you get into the academy, you got hairdressers that go to school longer than police officers. So we need to change the way that the academy is going and put in more bias training, more community relations training. And then once they hit the streets, we do the same thing, continuing training.
Thank you, Mr. Pollock. It sounds like you want to focus more on the selection process. Again, I'll say the question and I'm going to give, in that same order, rebuttal time. The question is, what measures would you implement to bridge the gap of distrust between law enforcement and the community? We're going to go to Mr. Chuck Watley for your rebuttal. 30 seconds, sir.
Hey, how you doing? I agree with a lot of things he stated. However, I think that we have to have a truthful and honest conversation, even though the events with Mr. Brooks and Mr. Floyd were horrible and tragic. We have to have an honest conversation. And to bridge that gap, I think all law enforcement personnel should be required to go through mental health treatment, like see a counselor of some sort. Not to say they're fit for duty or not, but over a period of time, violence can desensitize you, and that has effect on the job. So I think we have to gaining that compassion back into their hearts.
Time, sir. Thank you. Next rebuttal will go to Sheriff Tony.
Sure, thank you. I think my rebuttal is pretty simple. I've been in office now for 17 months, and the items that Mr. Pollock talked about has already been introduced. Beginning with, I put the first law enforcement director down there to head up HR. And we are doing a much more thorough applicant process and enhancing how many minorities we include into the agency, as well as we started a pre-selection process several months ago where every cadet goes through a pre-academy before we even accept them in the academy. But the issues are greater than that when we're talking about trying to develop the public's trust. It's also about what are we doing from an early warning system, which we launched in February, to ensure that we are tracking everything that occurs with our law enforcement officers and holding them accountable.
Time. Thank you. Next rebuttal, Mr. Wayne Clark. You have 30 seconds.
Sorry about that, Suzette. It's simple. I have no law enforcement background, so I have no bias, right? I'm outside looking in, trying to come in and fix this agency. Why? Look, it's got to start with the hiring process. It's got to go through training. You've got to change the culture that's there, and you've got to address mental health. Right now, our law enforcement officers are being asked to do too much when responding to certain incidents. You have someone on Broward Boulevard that is homeless and let's say he's nude and on drugs, right? They have two choices, take him to the hospital or arrest him. It's too much. We need to have other avenues to be able to address these things. And I agree with Sheriff Tony. He recently launched the community. Okay, I'll address it later.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Next, we will go to Mr. Raymond L. Hicks.
Yes, ma'am. First and foremost, what I would do is actually implement transparency and accountability. You know, you got to have transparency and accountability, and it starts from the top. It doesn't start from the bottom up. It starts from the top down. And you know, that situation that happened in Minneapolis it was totally preposterous. And had I been there, I would have pulled him off the guy. You know, it would have saved his job. And then on top of that, you know, he would have been still living today, and the cop would probably be still working. You know, but as a matter of fact, as I stated before, this is my book title, I'm Still Standing by Raymond Hicks. And you'll get
your time, 5 seconds.
About me.
Thank you, sir. All right, next rebuttal belongs to Sheriff Israel, or Scott Israel. Excuse me, I have force of habit.
That's okay. Three things, Suzette. Number one, I believe every person who carries a badge and a gun in the United States of America should receive the same training and meet the same standards. For Ohio to train differently than Florida, or cities in Florida to train differently or to go to different academies is unacceptable. You need to be trained to the same high standard. So we're all learning, doing the same things. Scenario-based hiring. I would make, as I was trying to do before I was suspended by the Republican governor, I was trying to make sure that we had folks in HR that were hiring people and giving them scenarios that they're going to see on the street, not shoot, don't shoot situations, but being called the name and how are they going to react to that name on the street. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And final rebuttal belongs to Mr. Willie Jones.
Good evening. In 2016, we introduced a conversation of the best practices for the 21st century. It came with 6 pillars. And the first pillar started with building trust and legitimacy. If the community does not believe the police is legitimately protecting them, serving them, they will not trust them. And what we found out is that most law enforcement leaders ask the public to trust them, but the public didn't violate their trust. We did. So the things we must do is look at the best practices
5 seconds.
that President Obama put in place for building and policing in the 21st century.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. So this is what we're going to do, because we have a bunch of questions and we see how long the rebuttals will take. I'm going to allow about 3 of you to give rebuttals. So if this is a question that you want to rebut, make sure you say something. All right? Or they say, see something, say something, please do. All right, so our next question in the order of candidates pre-selected at random will go to Mr. Chuck Whatley. So greater diversity within the sheriff's office in terms of ethnic diversity as well as gender diversity has been a concern for the public. Do you think it is possible to have a sheriff's department reflect the gender and ethnic diversity of the community it serves? And I'm gonna put a couple of subtexts there and you can address these in your answer. What about LGBTQ community? And what are some of the challenges with recruiting officers from their community? Do you have plans to address the ethnic diversity question? And what would you consider a good faith effort in this area? But the main question is, do you think it's possible to have the sheriff's office reflect the gender and ethnic diversity of the community it serves? Mr. Whatley, the question is yours.
Yes, I think it is possible. And currently, right now, and for over the past 10 or 15 years, that's something that the Broward Sheriff's Office has already been working at. Um, Sometimes people are a little inhibited as far as joining the Broward Sheriff's Office, thinking that they won't be able to blend in. Like some will feel it's a man's world or it's macho and things like that. But over the years, the Broward Sheriff's Office has reached out to the LGBTQ community and all persons in the county involved in various ethnic backgrounds. So it's all about recruiting. It's all about showing to people that they have a leader that they can trust. If they can't trust the leader, they have a leader that has lived a life of lies, who has done things wrong in the past, or has taken the agency astray, it's not going to work. You can have all the programs in the world. So if you have a leader that first is truthful and honest, everybody, regardless of their ethnic affiliation or LGBT community, they're going to want to work for that person because they know they're all about the truth and they're all about taking responsibility for themselves, not just pointing fingers at the other officers on the department.
You have 45 seconds. Any other thoughts?
And another thing that Willie Jones brought up, that everything is based on trust and legitimacy. That's a problem that we have not had in the Broward Sheriff's Office in over 30 years. It has been filled with leaders who spread lies, who do lies, who make backdoor deals, and thus they lose the trust of the community. You can have all the programs in the world, but once the leader is known for being a liar or making deals to fill his own personal pockets and not caring about the people, then all that work has gone to nothing. So it starts with the leader being truthful and honest and sincere with the public, working from the heart. And that's my final.
Okay, your time has elapsed. I'm going to allow, if there is, because you have made some specific allegations, with either former Sheriff Israel or Sheriff Tony want to respond, and then I'll also allow 2 other rebuttals.
Sure, I'll respond first. I don't believe any of those were addressed to me, at least I hope not, but to hire people, Rick Party, the great disc jockey from Hot 105 who went to Atlanta, coined me the people's sheriff. There's not a community. People are gonna, agencies, football teams, baseball teams are gonna take on the personality of the leader. There wasn't a community I didn't go to. There wasn't a community that I didn't put civilians in community outreach from. So we were able to connect. We in publications, we advertised in publications in all communities for positions within the agency. But I think it was the fact, Suzette, that I was in every single community in Broward County, the most visible sheriff we've ever had. And I think that's what helped our connectivity.
Thank you, Sheriff Tony. Would you like a response?
Yeah, sure. You know, I didn't hear my name targeted towards any of that, but I will address some inaccuracies as to whether or not the recruitment standards was allowing for, you know, a very diverse population between gender and ethnicity. When I came into this organization from the very beginning, we had a law enforcement deficit of over 200 vacant positions in law enforcement. And we had to create a much more robust platform to hire and recruit a diverse amount of deputies in this organization. And we've done that. We've taken that vacancy down to 59 available at this point, and we will continue to bring in more minorities in this community. In addition, we established the LGBTQ committee, which was the first one established in this agency's history, where we are now in conjunction working with our partners in that community and bringing in a much more diverse background of employees, regardless of what their sexual preference may be.
Thank you. Will anybody else like to address this question?
I got another rebuttal to that one.
well, wait. Well, you took the first, but let's go ahead. If Mr. Hicks, Mr. Jones, anyone else would like to take that rebuttal time? Mr. Pollock?
Yes.
Go ahead, sir.
You want to start with me or Mr.
Yes,
Jones?
go ahead, Mr. Pollock.
Oh, okay. BSO haven't really, during my tenure there, we really haven't had that problem of recruiting different, ethnic groups or background. One of the problems is we can do better. So what we need to do is we need to get out in those communities and let them know that we are hiring, not for them to search around and try and find it. We need to make a presence out there. That's what
Okay. Last call for any other rebuttal. Go ahead, Mr. Jones.
Diversity is required. We must stop playing games. We must put the policies in place that resemble and follow directions of the Constitution of the United States. We must take out our personal feelings and beliefs so we can properly reflect the people we are serving. Diversity should be demanded, required at all times, in all phases, and at all levels.
Okay, thank you. We're done with that question. Next question goes to Sheriff Gregory Tony. The question is, what has the death of George Floyd and the peaceful protests and civil unrest after taught you as a political leader? And what will you do to impart this knowledge at the Broward Sheriff's Office among deputies and other leaders in the agency? I'll read it again. What has the death of George Floyd and the peaceful protests and civil unrest taught you as a political leader? And what will you impart as far as this knowledge to your sheriff's office and other deputies as you lead the agency?
Sure. For the first part of the question, the lessons I've learned is that the ability of the public to get out and protest and be heard is vital. But the next element is for them to take actions to ensure that they hold their elected officials and many others, whether mayors, commissioners, accountable for not only hearing them, but introducing activities to make sure we mitigate it. I can tell you what activities I have done in this organization before this happened to ensure that we wouldn't have this occur in Broward County, from enacting our early warning system back in February 2019, creating the agency's first use of force review board compiled with subject matter experts to examine it. I had to remove the professional standards committee personnel that was established under my predecessor because they were not holding people accountable. There was a multitude of violations and excessive force where deputies were not held accountable, and that was part of the culture. So we had to reestablish that. I put in a judge to chair it, and we also looked at what can we do to bridge the deficiency in cultural awareness and understanding. And I just launched a $1 million commitment for racial equity and implicit bias training, not only for BSO, but to bring in every single law enforcement officer in this county. And I headed that up by getting every single chief of police at the table and ensuring that they would execute this as a priority and not something that was really more of a emotional response right now, but they would forget about it tomorrow. And we're continuing to push forward in the different relationship building we can do in this community. In addition to that, we launched a Park, Walk, and Talk program back in August of 2019, the first that the agency's ever had it, where we now require our law enforcement officers to get out of their vehicles and engage the public in a positive setting. We had over 16,500 of those between August to now, and it's been effective. We put forth real community development and programs where we launched our neighborhood support teams, where we've been able to engage the community, understand the needs, and during COVID-19 crisis, we actually helped work with Feeding South Florida, where we've been able to coordinate and issue out over 16 million pounds of food to this community. So there's a lot of things that's learned and more that we can do. But as you know, we're planting seeds for the future, and we just have to make sure they come into fruition. Thank you.
Time, Sheriff. Would we have any rebuttals at this time?
Yes, I'd like to have a rebuttal.
Okay, I see Mr. Pollock and Mr. Jones. Go ahead, Mr. Pollock.
Okay, first of all, I support the peaceful protesters. You know, that's number one, because that's how our civil rights and thing was built back in the 60s, based on peaceful protesters. But I have to disagree with the park and walk. We've been doing park and walk since the 70s, since the early 80s, since I've been a police officer. So this is nothing new. You know, when we talk about park, walk, and talk, that should be part of your job. You have to put that in writing and make it a mandatory policy, you know, for deputies, you know, to have to go out and do. Secondly, it's just what we have to do is, until we put pen to paper, nothing's going to change. We've been talking about this for 3 to 4 decades. Until we, as elected officials, make the changes, put it to paper, nothing's going to happen.
Okay. Thank you. Let's go to Mr. Jones.
Again, in 2015, 2016, we brought these issues to the table in that run. Although the untimely death of Mr. Floyd, we must remember we have lost Black males to police actions here in Broward County. No one has taken any action, portable action, to change what was going on. It goes back to selection, it goes to training. If we do the proper selection, the proper training, we can stop what's going on. pen to paper policies do not take lives. People that carry the guns and the badges when they do the missteps. And those are the things we must correct before we can stop that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take one more rebuttal if there is one.
Mr. Hicks.
Go ahead, Mr. Israel. And I also see Mr. Hicks. Go ahead, Mr. Israel, then Mr. Hicks. And then we'll go to the next question.
First of all, the committee that Greg Tony disbanded was his right, but the use of force committee we had in place was tried and tested professionals, and they held everyone accountable. The fact that he has this walk, park, and talk, you cannot believe how many deputies contact me and tell me how ridiculous it is. Would you want a deputy like Chauvin, who murdered Mr. George Floyd, to be a community deputy? The key to it is to put people, civilians in these places who will touch people with their hearts and minds and walk into places, who've come from communities, putting people back into communities that they've grown up in. That's how you connect with a community, not through law enforcement.
Time. Thank you. And final rebuttal goes to Mr. Hicks.
Yes, ma'am. You know, the Black people have said, you know, enough is enough. You know, this is one of the reasons why they're out there protesting. All these individuals that's sitting on this panel right now, Sheriff Tony, Alvin Pollock, Scott Israel, Mr. Willie Jones, as well as Chief Watley, they all know me, ma'am. And because of the fact that I spoke out against corruption within the Broward Sheriff Office, where people's being tormented, drugs planted on them, they actually literally tried to take my life from me. Not one of these individuals stood up and said anything about what happened to me and my family. So to be honest with you, one of the reasons why I'm running for sheriff is to bring awareness and to be a voice for the people. I don't care what color you are, black, white, purple, green, or orange, it doesn't make a difference to me. The fact of the matter is that we're supposed to be professional, we're supposed to lead by example, and that's one of the reasons why I took on the job as a deputy sheriff.
Time. Thank you. Mr. Clark, we're going to go for you. Now we're going to pivot to police unions. The question reads, police unions have often benefited their members in terms of pay and working conditions. However, they increasingly stand in the way of reforms that improve policing and the standing of police in the eyes of the local community. How would you manage this as a sheriff to ensure that police unions understand their role in the community and are working with the executive leadership to promote good policing policy?
That's a great question, Suzette. First and foremost, as a sheriff, I'm going to actually talk to the union leaders. The current sheriff has gone almost 500 days without talking to some of the union leaders. To me, that's a mistake. Whether I agree with their position or not, I'm going to have that open door policy. You know, one of the things I plan to do in my administration is make a seat at the table for the fire union to come up and have those discussions, because the unions are important and they play a vital role with policing. They've been there for, you know, for decades in the United States. That doesn't mean that they're going to be in charge and they're running things, but there needs to be an open line of communications to be able to talk to them and have an understanding that when one of the deputies does something and is a bad cop, then he needs to be fired, reprimanded, suspended, or something. You got to have that in place, and you got to build trust with the unions to know that, A, as sheriff, I'm going to allow due process, and I'm going to allow due process to take course, but also to know that, you know, at the end of the day, if you don't do your job and you're a bad cop, you're gone. Because there's nothing worse than in any industry, if someone's a bad apple, then they're a bad apple and they need to go. You know, that gives the good people a bad name. That being said, you know, with unions in Broward County, they make up a large portion of the individuals in the agency. And if you don't have that open line of communications, you don't have the trust in the deputies, what happens? You have low morale. Low morale means the citizens of Broward County aren't being taken care of or addressed as they need to be. Broward Sheriff's Office reaches and touches every citizen in Broward County in one way or another, whether it's the law enforcement, the fire rescue, whether it's the airport, whether it's the seaport, whether it's the jails, and so whether it's a courthouse. In every fashion, Broward Sheriff's Office touches the community. We need morale in a positive light. We need great. We need the men and women proud to wear the uniform and come to work every day, and that's what I plan to build.
Okay, thank you. I'll take 2 rebuttals. Go ahead, Mr. Wiley. And then Sheriff Tony, go ahead, Mr. Wiley.
Yeah, Yeah, I agree with Mr. Clark 100%. You have to have that open door communication with dealing with the unions and establish that policy of progressive discipline based on certain acts and so forth. This has been carried on for quite a while. The problem with the morale of the Broward Sheriff's Office currently, it is the lowest that I've ever seen as far as concerning the employees, because the current sheriff does not have an open dialogue with the employees or the union. Instead, if he doesn't like what they're doing, he retaliates against them. This is war, and this is the way he is with that department. He's working for a department where his very own employees do not trust him based
5 seconds.
on his past and his falsifications when he speaks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. And Sheriff Tony, you have the last word on this question.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of unions, if anyone's paying attention to what's occurring across this country, when it comes to police excessive force and brutality, one of the key elements that creates complications for administrators are the union's inability to understand that they serve this community first before they even serve the law enforcement officers in this agency. And they've taken a combative role for holding people accountable. And you even just heard Scott Israel state that his professional standards committee was spot on in their assessments. So they were accurate to say that a man beaten handcuffs should only be suspended. They were accurate that a young man face being slammed in the ground should only be exonerated. The problem is about holding people accountable. And that includes union representation and every other employee that works in this organization.
We're going to move to our next question, and then we will go to Mr. Hicks. Mr. Hicks, this is a question about accreditation. In June 2019, the Commission for Florida Law Enforcement Accreditation voted 13-0 to revoke Broward County Sheriff's Office accreditation status. What steps would you take to become reaccredited, and how do you assure the citizens of Broward County that BSO is using the best professional practices?
Well, first and foremost, the one reason why they lost accreditation is because of what's going on within the sheriff department, and it's been going on for quite some time now. This is the first time that I've heard in so many years that BSO has lost accreditation. Is because of the turmoil that's going on throughout the community, the agency, where inmates are losing their lives, deputies are jumping, fighting with subjects while they're in custody, banging inmates' face on the ground, all these other different things that's going on. That's one of the reasons why they lost accreditation. Again, you got to bring transparency and accountability, but I'm very optimistic, that things can change in the near future. And I truly believe that I can be that change for the Broward Sheriff's Office. I started in law enforcement back in 1986. I'm 54 years of age now. I was 21 years of age. All these gentlemen that you see on this panel right now, except for Mr. Wayne Clark and Sheriff Tony, I've actually worked hand in hand with before. And they will tell you that we've always had accreditation. When they came in and they assessed the agency, we always passed accreditation. It's because of all these different things that you see going on now. For an example, when you take an inmate and you give a gentleman who's on suicide watch a razor while he's in solitary confinement, and this person cut off his penis, and he called the media and said, hey, listen, I just cut my penis off because I'm not going to be able to use this again. First of all, he shouldn't have even had a razor. So again, when you talk about accreditation, ma'am, it starts with the top administration at the Broward Sheriff's Office, and that's something that needs to be changed.
Thank you. You have 12 seconds left. If not, we will take any rebuttal.
And I will continue. And on top of that, take an example, the gentleman that was actually in the Sally Port, he was handcuffed and wanted the officer to beat him while he was already detained in the Sally Port. Here again, you had another individual that was at the hospital. He was beaten while he was handcuffed and shackled to the bed. So that's why they lost accreditation, ma'am.
Time. Thank you. Do we have anybody with rebuttals? Go ahead, Mr. Jones, Mr. Watley, and then Sheriff Tony. Go ahead.
Let's talk about accreditation. Accreditation is the standards of the industry, the best standards practice of the industry. If the agency lost its accreditation, it's because it failed either in training, policy writing, oversight, budgeting, again, training, personnel hiring. So we must take a look at the areas that were decredited, that took them away. And those are the areas we focus on to get reaccredited. All the policy writing again, all the political talk all again, does not give you accreditation. Let's get to the best practice of the 21st century, and we can guarantee this agency will be accredited.
Thank you. Time. Mr. Wiley?
Yeah, Willie Jones touches on a point. We lost our accreditation. One reason is because of one leader for lack of preparedness for a dynamic situation. And then there was utter panic. I was at the airport shooting and I was on scene within a minute. So I know how they handled those instances or situations back then. Number two, we had a chance to get our accreditation back under Sheriff Tony. However, they found that every time he talked to the media, he wasn't telling the truth. Yes, we have plenty of equipment for COVID-19. Yes, we are adequately prepared for it.
5 seconds.
This is why he had problems with the unions and they started fighting back because his employees were dying and they were in the hospital while he's
Time. Thank you. Sheriff Tony?
Sure. Here's the accuracy behind the accreditation and its loss. The Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Commission had outlined a multitude of systematic failures related to policies, protocols, and trainings, and lack of leadership in holding members accountable there. And they revoked that. The CFA took that report, analyzed it, and we lost the accreditation. But I went up and presented and displayed to this accreditation board of 13 professional law enforcement officers and judges that we have fixed these issues, that we have mitigated all the harms that they were concerned about, and we are on track to gain our accreditation back basically over a year and a half in advance.
Okay, and I think it was Mr. Pollack putting that finger up. One last comment, go ahead.
Scott Israel?
Okay. Wait, sir. Mr. Pollack had been reaching and then I'll come to you last. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. Some of the reasons also, that was pointed out, when you have females giving birth in jails, that is so horrible, okay? And also you failed during the pandemic when we lost lives. We had several employees to lose their lives, for inefficiencies, because they didn't have the lack of proper PPE equipment. How can we obtain accreditation?
5 seconds.
Yelling at the leadership and at the top. That's why
we'll have the last word. Thank you, sir. Time. And finally, Mr. Israel.
Yes, this happened under my watch, and I just shake my head every time I hear Greg Tony speak about false statements. Accreditation, there was nothing wrong with our agency. This is important for everyone listening to know. And Greg Tony knows this. The assessors voted to give us a grade A reaccreditation. A grade A reaccreditation. There were no problems with training policies or anything else. This was a group of Republicans who wanted to support the governor when he suspended me. So they went ahead and done this. Greg Tony could have had the accreditation put back in, but he purposely did not fly to Tallahassee, so this would happen. It had nothing to do with training or any other aspect of what these gentlemen have spoken about. This was all about a Republican group of people. The assessor said, give them back their accreditation with a gold standard.
Time. All right, you're going to have the next question, sir. Ms. Israel.
Yes,
it has been said that police make more arrests in predominantly minority and poor neighborhoods. What can be done to address any perception by citizens that the laws in Broward County are not equally applied to everyone?
Well, it's not a perception, it's actually happening.
Say what you said again?
It's not a perception, it's actually happening. More Black and brown young men go to jail than white men. That's a common fact. What I've done, I think I've done more than any other leader in Broward County. This is why I ran for sheriff, was to blow up the schoolhouse to jailhouse pipeline. When I got in, the civil citation program allows a deputy to arrest for a misdemeanor or to issue a civil citation. I made it mandatory. Willie Jones worked there. Al Pollack knows that. They know this happened. Watley knows this. I made it mandatory that every deputy who would be able to arrest a juvenile for a misdemeanor would give them a civil citation. So it would not go on their record. They would get help in areas like narcotics, alcohol, anger management. And they would go to a tried and tested class for about 45 days. And these classes were viable. And they would turn these individuals' lives around. When I left office, the recidivism rate in Broward County amongst adults was 64%. The recidivism rate in our civil citation program was 4%. These kids were not coming back because they were given a second chance. Kids don't spell love L-O-V-E like you and I do, Suzette. Kids spell love T-I-M-E. So we had mentors and we had programs that were working. And kids were staying out of jail and continue to stay out of jail. It went over to the Promise program. Shame on some people who because we had a horrific evil killer, the worst imaginable, destroyed lives and people in Stoneman Douglas. But that killer wasn't in the Promise program. And to take away the Promise program, to even hint at that, as Sheriff Tony did when he came in here, that's so wrong. I have continually said we will measure our success by the kids we keep out of jail, not the kids we keep in jail. And we've been able to do that over and over and over again. And that's why parents through all our communities, African-American communities, Caribbean communities, Hispanic communities, have come up to me and have really appreciated the efforts we have made. And we were, my last point, it was so successful that the state of Florida took civil citations from 1 to 3. Thank you.
Your mic's off, Suzette. Suzette speaks. Your microphone's off.
Well, I kept staying time.
Gotcha.
All right, sorry about that. So I was saying that I had not heard from Mr. Clark with a rebuttal, so we'll allow him to go first. I saw Watley's hand, Mr. Watley's hand thereafter. Go ahead, Mr. Clark.
Suzette, to answer your question is, first you got to increase diversity in the agency, right? To get the community to trust you. You got to improve community relations. And I'm going to be real short in this rebuttal, and the fact that Scott Israel's policies clearly failed the community when 17 people were murdered.
The question had to pertain to, do you think minority neighborhoods are over-policed? What say you to that, Mr. Clark?
Right, that's what I'm saying. I think that you've got to increase diversity in the agency to have the citizens in those communities trust the agencies. And I think you got to create a culture in the agency to be able to have your police officers identify people in the community, relate with people in the community, and be able to respond to them and try to lower that arrest rate. You know, we don't want people, you know, afraid of seeing, you know, a BSO car drive through the community. We want to be able to have that open, you know, wave your hand and say hi and people know each other.
Time. Okay. Mr. Watley, we'll go to you next.
Yes. We've had a lot of diversification within the community. You know, we had officers that were African-American, work in the African-American community and so forth, but there are times where they were even rejected by their own community. And a lot of times it has to be, it's dealt with because they don't sense that compassion from the person himself. So it's more than diversification, but you have to develop within the young people, especially the young people in the community, a sense of compassion. And number two, they're always told all these negative things about police and so forth, and that affects the young person's mind. I think we should hit them more with phrases like educate, achieve, and believe. You know, push education. So when officers engage with them, you know, in the past they look for problems.
5 seconds.
So forth. I think they should push education. There is nothing in this country that stops anybody, regardless of race, from being successful.
Time. Thank you. All right, I see Mr. Pollock's hand, Mr. Jones as well, I see. Go ahead, Mr. Pollock.
Yes, we need to get these kids before they get to the civil citation programs. I mean, the civil citation program works. I love it. I believe in it, but I think that we can get them before by referring them to our PAL programs, our Explorers, our Boys and Girls. We have a lot of community outreach program. All they are lacking, some of them, is funding. We need to take some of that law enforcement money and put it back into those type of programs so that we can help save these kids and put them on a direct path before they utilize those 2 or 3 civil
5
cites.
seconds. Okay, I'm gonna just, to reiterate the question, it has been said that police make more arrests in predominantly minority or poor neighborhoods. What can be done to address any perception by citizens that the laws in Broward County are not equally applied to everyone? Go ahead, Mr. Jones.
Well, the first things first, Suzette. If we don't change the culture within the police agency, within the sheriff's office, we can do all the talking we want. police officers, law enforcement personnel, because of the 20th century practices, says they're evaluated quantitatively. How many arrests you make, how many citations you write. They don't deal with the quality of life issues that will stop and prohibit it, because police officers, like any other profession, want to excel upward. So if we're going to remove that, we need to change the whole dynamics of how we hire, how we hire, and how we grade and evaluate, because those explicit and implicit biases will show up because they want to excel. Thank you.
Fine. All right, I see Mr. Hicks, and I see Sheriff Tony also raising hands. Go ahead, Mr. Hicks.
Yes, ma'am. First and foremost, I'm a Black kid and I grew up in the Black community and I grew up in poverty. And I think it's a shame that, Blacks are being targeted each and every single day. Mm-hmm. And the fact of the matter is that, no one seemed to want to do anything about it. I grew up where they were stabbing, cutting. My mother was shot. My dad was in prison, but I wanted to go into law enforcement. So to be honest with you, how do you inspire these young kids, and say, hey, why don't you go into law enforcement if we're not making a difference? The fact of the matter is that it starts with us. And all these individuals that's sitting on here that works in law enforcement, they know that Black people are being targeted each and every single day, and it needs to stop. Listen, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It needs to stop, and it starts from the top up. I don't care what color you are. If you commit a crime, then guess what? You made the bed hard. You got to lie down in it.
Fine. Thank you, sir. And then Sheriff Tony, you also wanted a rebuttal?
Yes, ma'am. First, there was this notion that I was against the Promise Work program is false. I support it. There's also commentary that the mandate for civil citation was conducted under previous administration is false. When I took command of this office, one of the core conversations I had with Mayor Honus was related to how the civil citation program was not being used effectively in comparison to our local counties to the north and south. And so this idea that all these things were in place is false. To your specific question, the importance is for us to diversify not only the command staff, but the personnel that is out in the field. We have roughly 230 officers who happen to be African-American out of over 1,500. And that is not reflective of this community. And how do we expect to be able to police a community that we don't understand?
230 out of 1,500. That's an interesting fact there, sure. All right, we're going to move from this question, and I'm going to go to Mr. Jones has not received his 2-minute question. Then we have some very interesting questions coming in from our guests and audiences. We will allow those who are watching, please drop your question in this form. We thank each and every candidate who has decided to join us this evening. Again, all who qualified on time were invited, but these are the gentlemen who stepped up to the plate to make their voices heard, and so that we can understand where they stand on the position. So thank you for joining us, and please leave your questions. So Mr. Jones, your question has to do with the Police Executive Research Forum. All right, the Police Executive Research Forum and other policing experts say, and this is an incident we just saw in Atlanta, police should never be the sole justification for using weapons such as tasers, and I would add even deadly force. What is your position on the use of tasers on fleeing suspects?
I missed part of your first question.
I'll read it again.
Yeah,
all right, Mr. Jones.
You froze up on me.
All right, I'll say it again.
That's the first part.
Okay, we're going to talk about the use of tasers and deadly force on fleeing suspects. The question says, the Police Executive Research Forum and other policing experts say running away from the police should never be the sole justification for using weapons such as tasers. What is your position on the use of tasers on fleeing suspects?
Well, according to state statutes, you're not supposed to use force on fleeing felons or shooting at cars. Deputies and law enforcement personnel should not do that. My position is if they are caught doing that, violating the policies, they will be brought to bear. They will be brought to be disciplined according to the policy. People that are running away from officers and deputies are not a threat. We don't even shoot at felons, not just misdemeanors. So there's no reason why deputies should be using tasers or any other weapon when they're running away. And the example that you use in Atlanta, this young man gave them his license. They had his car. They knew who he was. There was no need for them to use any type of force once he broke away, because the opportunity to apprehend him would have been at later without any force being utilized. So no, I do not stand up to or will endorse deputies.
I hear you, sir. You got a minute left. So I would like you to also address chokeholds, and on the rebuttals, you can do both. And I'm going to say, according to the Newsweek magazine, Miami-Dade County, for example, has still allows the use of applied carotid triangle restraint, also known as a chokehold. Is there a difference between the chokehold and applied carotid triangle restraint? Where are you standing on, as far as the use of chokeholds?
No, we're not trained to use that. It was never been in the training. What you've seen in the news, what you're seeing is people putting their knees in people's back and on their necks. We're not trained to do that. So we must get away from that. But that comes from the 20th century training practice, the warrior mentality. We're training our deputies to be warriors, not peacekeepers. So we must break away from those old practices, those old training. No, if I caught again.
So you're no on fleeing, possible fleeing suspect use of taser, and you're no on the use of chokeholds.
Correct.
Okay. Do we have other respondents, Mr. Watley?
Yeah, basically.
I'm coming down the line on this one because we want you on the record.
Okay, basically the question's kind of gray in area because it says not using the taser on a fleeing suspect. Well, if the suspect commits an armed robbery, shoots a 5-year-old girl and drops the weapon, but he's running away from you, I'm going to use the taser, okay? Because you have to have a little bit of common sense. So it depends on the totality of the circumstances. It's a shame what happened in Atlanta. They said they could have picked him up later, but what they're not saying is that person was released out of jail due to COVID-19 because he's serving 7 years for child abuse. He's already stopped one prior time for DUI and was not subsequently arrested. This was
your time has elapsed, so I hear you saying that depends on the circumstance. You would allow taser use
so
on fleeing suspect. And as far as chokeholds go, sir,
they're at a loss no matter what they did. If he would have left there and then killed somebody via DUI,
understood.
They would have those officers for that.
Second part of my question: where do you stand on the use of carotid restraint or chokeholds?
That came into existence from the MMA mentality that was being taught in various agencies. MMA became popular. They started using it in training. Even Sheriff Tony had them doing full bore sparring. You see videos where they mount the person and they continue punching on the person and so forth. So
and where do you stand?
The entire dynamic of training, and it has to be totally removed.
So you don't agree with the use of chokeholds then?
Not at all.
Okay, Mr. Pollack, how about you?
I don't agree with the use of chokeholds and also knees to the neck. That's something that the Broward Sheriff's Office has never, ever taught. Again, when you have multiple police agencies throughout this country, all the training is a little bit different. Also, tasers. Tasers are non-lethal weapons. And also in Atlanta, it wasn't a taser that was used, it was a firearm, that killed the fleeing subject.
Thank you, sir. We're gonna go next to Mr. Hicks. You're on mute, sir. Sorry, please unmute yourself. We'll help you out. Let's get him unmuted, please. All right, we can hear you now. Go ahead, Mr. Hicks.
Okay, I don't know what happened, but anyway, first and foremost, anyone that works in law enforcement knows that once you take a person, you put your hand. I mean, for an example, my size, I'm 280-something pounds. If I choke a person, I'm going to cut off oxygen to the brain. It's unacceptable. That's something that we've never been taught. And I started in law enforcement in 86? Some people say, Ms. Suzette, that I didn't go through the crossover academy. Well, you can see right here that I went from correction to law enforcement up in Palm Beach. So I think it's unfortunate what happened to that gentleman in Atlanta. And it's a shame, it's a disgrace, because if he's running, how could he be a threat? They had possibly identified this
5
gentleman.
seconds.
Yes, ma'am.
So,
I'm sorry?
Right, so I'm gonna ask you plainly, how about using tasers on felons or anybody who's a suspect that's fleeing? Are you for the use or not for the use?
No, ma'am. No. What's the purpose of using the taser and the person run away from you? You've
Okay,
already
so that's a no.
identified it.
That's a no. Your time
That's
has
a no.
elapsed.
Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
As well as no on chokeholds. Okay, thank you. We're gonna go down the line. Mr. Jones? We can unmute Mr. Jones, please. We can unmute him.
Willie, turn on your mic.
I'm here. Suzette, I answered the question.
All right. Oh, sorry. You were my first.
I was a
Sorry.
2-minute part.
Sorry, I gave you that question. I am looking at your picture there. We'll go to Sheriff Tony. Sorry, sir.
Sure.
You need to turn on your mic, Gregory.
Can you unmute him?
Thank
All right, there you
Can
go.
hear me
Now I can
Going
hear
down.
you. Go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, the Broward Police Academy here, the Public Safety Institute, had banned any form of strangleholds or chokeholds training in the academy. And so it's correct. It's not something that we practice here in Broward County. It's not something we do here at the Sheriff's Office. In the course of, upon examining this, I made sure that we put that policy back out for recertification and having all our people sign up and be aware that we do not support that. As far as the taser application, I go to what Al said on this one, which is it was a gun that killed him. And we can't allow for our law enforcement personnel to use excessive force when we have a fleeing suspect who is not presenting any type of imminent threat to them or any other person. But I would sidebar with this. We talk about de-escalation techniques and things that we can do the things we can mitigate it. They were out there for 25 minutes. It probably was a time to do a courtesy and maybe allow him to walk home or even take him home.
All right, time. All right. And who has not answered this question? Who would like to answer this question? Go ahead, Mr. Clark.
First and foremost, I don't agree with chokeholds either. I don't think they're appropriate in these scenarios. Second of all, with the taser, I agree with Chuck. I think it's on a case-by-case basis, and that's where the training of these officers and these deputies is so vital. You've got to train them to use good judgment, proper judgment, and with the ability to do that, and you've got to increase the amount of training when it comes here, right? You've got to be able to have good judgment, and you've got to weed those people out. Someone that doesn't have good judgment shouldn't have a gun and shouldn't have a taser.
Okay. Any final comments for anyone who we haven't heard from yet? Go ahead, Mr. Israel. Can hear you now. Go ahead.
No place in police work for any type of chokeholds or any type of hold that deprives someone of oxygen. No place, no reason to use a taser or really anything on anyone fleeing unless the person is about to embark upon deadly force to themselves or someone else. No reason to use a taser or whatever. And since I have some time, I do want to make a comment.
Go ahead. 10 seconds.
Wayne had said before that when I was sheriff, their policies were not right. Very disappointed to hear a lawyer talk to a police officer about what policy, something he knows little about. But more importantly, the real shame is he's a Republican, and the Republican special magistrate who oversaw Stoneman Douglas said, put the sheriff back to work. There were no policy deficiencies.
Time. Thank you,
Don't
sir.
worry, Scott. We'll have time to talk about it.
We're going to pause. We're going to go to a question that came in on our message board from one of our viewers, and it's directed at Mr. Pollock. Mr. Pollock, the questioner says, you have been endorsed by the unions that also primarily resist change. Will you stand up to the unions to institute change?
Absolutely, I would stand up to the unions and any other employee. That's my job as a leader. First of all, the union endorsement doesn't mean that I become a puppet for the union. What that means is I would have an open door policy where I would sit down and talk to all union members and keep them informed of what's going on in day-to-day operation. Absolutely.
Okay, Mr. Watley, you'll have the next question, and I think we are about the 10-minute mark. We probably have a chance for 2 more questions, I would say, and then we're going to allow each of you to give closing statements. So we're going to go to Mr. Watley, who is next. It says, in light of adverse public reactions to recent controversial police use of force incidents at BSO, What are your plans to ensure that BSO deputies are properly trained in de-escalation techniques before using tasers and other lethal force? I think it's a good follow-up to what we have talked about here in terms of de-escalation techniques. Would you take that, please, Mr. Watley?
Yes. Well, one, you got to work on the heart of the person and build a sense of compassion with them. Over years and years of officer dealing with violence, they might become slightly desensitized. So you have to provide them with mental health training and treatment. Every once in a while, you know, they deal with all kinds of things that the normal person cannot handle, and you take care of your employees. This is not to take them off the road, but this is to help them so that they still have that sense of compassion. Because if a situation gets overheated, you don't want them to overreact based on that warrior mindset. I'd also take out that as far as training is concerned, the MMA mentality, which has been taught there for the past couple of years. Broward Sheriff's Office got the terminology, Broward County, Broward Cowards, and Sheriff Tony came in and he implemented a strong MMA mentality where they were full on sparring and deputies were getting injured where they couldn't work. So I removed the MMA mentality, work on this de-escalation and control techniques. That's always been my specialty in all my years of law enforcement, where I worked with officers on that. My specialty was defensive tactics training. And I know it like the back of my hand. And every time I set the example, I had armed suspects, but I controlled the situation using controlled techniques, not beating people, jumping on them, holding them down by their neck. So I would use those examples and I'd change the entire atmosphere of the training division. Thank you.
All right, you have 25 seconds left. Any other comments?
Yeah, I wanted to go back to Sheriff Scott Israel's Promise program and his civil citations. He made it sound like it was his idea. No, it was Florida legislation. And in fact, him and Runcie added crimes to the list, such as sexual assault, bullying, threats. This is why prior to MSD, you never saw a student getting arrested for making a threat of shooting up a school. It was only after MSD. And the reason why they had to bring down the crime rate, and then the county received $53 million in return.
5 seconds. Okay, thank you. Your time has elapsed. Do we have any other rebuttals to the de-escalation techniques that we'd like to see raised? Go ahead, Sheriff Tony.
Sure, I won't spend too much time on this one. It sounds like the same rhetoric and false narratives that were produced by the union president about what we changed in terms of policies and protocols. It's clear we didn't change anything. We haven't enhanced any defensive tactics. It sounds like this is just another excuse for holding deputies accountable for when they step out of the line, and I will refuse any of it.
Okay. I didn't see any other rebuttal. You have the next. Oh, sorry. Do you have another rebuttal?
I would.
Mr. Israel, go ahead.
Yes, that's absolutely a false statement that Greg Tony just made. He came in and personally changed the training. 15 police officers under his command went to the hospital, one with a brain bleed because of how violent the training was. And those deputies got out at that school that day at Taravella High School, and every Broward Sheriff's employee knows this. And they went out there with a mission that they were going to take charge of that situation. And the union is right when they say they took on the personality of the leader. The leader wanted this bravado. He wanted this cop's cop. They went out there. They behaved like cops, and they got arrested. But he actually suspended them probably 5 months later than he should have. He did that to be politically, to do politically pander.
I love these numbers of 15 and all this creative items that are coming out.
Tony, we're coming to you for the next question. You're next in line, sir, for the next question.
Yes, ma'am.
You can handle it anything you want in your 2 minutes, but next question is ready. Okay. It says, outside of your role, there's so many good questions. I really might rapid fire you guys before we sign off, and you guys take what you want to, but you're the next one. Outside of your role in law enforcement, have you ever formally mentored in communities of color, work with, for example, the Urban League, the NAACP, or any other group dedicated to empowering at-risk and vulnerable youth?
Yes, I have. And I've started this long before I even became a police officer, engaging and using my stories and testaments for my survivals and the things I've been able to persevere through to inspire as many minorities, especially young Black men, who oftentimes suffer with having someone at the household that they can look up to. And that's something that I've expanded now as the sheriff. We started a BSO youth development program where we are working with the Divine Nine, our African-American fraternities and sororities. I've committed $250,000 to launch this program. And I was excited to hear that the county is looking at ways in which they can either match it or enhance it and make it a budgetary line item. So this is not something that's going to stop, regardless if I'm the sheriff or not. I have an obligation to go back and pull people up in this community, not just within this agency. Back to this notion of, you know, there's 15 plus people injured with brain bleeds. You know, I hope the public pulls records and look at all this stuff, because the commentary is about fear. I have heard nothing about what the performances aspect has been in terms of what this administration has been able to accomplish, because we've done more great work in 18 months than what Scott administration did in 6 years.
You have 45 seconds.
I'll yield.
You'll yield. Okay.
Yes.
I'd like any other persons who have volunteered. Can you just raise your hands for me if you've actually volunteered with youth, young adult programs in minority communities at all? Mr. Jones, I see Mr. Pollock, I see Mr. Watley. All right, we'll check your resumes. We'll trust your word here. Thank you very much. And there are so many other great questions here, but we are almost out of time. I'd like to also do a raise of hands on this other question before we let you make your closing statements. Broward County is overwhelmingly Democratic with about 50+% Democrats. Is anyone here a lifelong Democrat? If you are, will you raise your hand, please?
No, they know.
Okay.
I was.
I'm just seeing Mr. Hicks, Mr. Pollock. All right. I just want to for the record, if not, we have other party affiliations. We also have things about systematic racism within the police department. And do you believe it or not, I won't put you on the spot and have you speak just so quickly on that, because I think those need a little bit more time. So since we are almost out of time, we're going to go into our final wrap up. We're going to do it in reverse order. We're going to start with Mr. Jones. You have 1 minute as far as a closing statement. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm running for sheriff. I'm a lifelong Democrat. I've never been a part of any of the party. I've mentored groups such as the 5,000 Role Models. But as I stated in my opening, Lady Justice, her blindfold have been removed for special interest groups, special monies, special endorsements. Our community can no longer go with the status quo. We must, right now, get away from the 20th century. And at the end of the day, we must embrace the teachings, the practice of the 21st century best policing techniques. We can no longer go along with who raised the most money, who has the most endorsement. The people that we vote for this office, we must look at their character, their ethnical background, and their moralities, their mores. We must make sure we're doing more than voting in a resume. We got to vote in the whole person.
5 seconds.
And I am an Omega Psi Phi. I belong to the Divine Nine. And been given.
All right, throw it in there. Okay, throw it in. Okay. All right. All right. Thank you, Mr. Jones. All right, we're going to go next to Mr. Scott Israel.
Can you hear me, Suzette?
We can hear you now.
I'd like to thank all the sororities for getting together for such an important forum. It's simple. If I were a Republican, I would still have my job. I went up to Tallahassee. It was a fraudulent practice. A man running for governor as a Republican made some promises to some people in Parkland and made good on him to suspend me. I did everything this community wanted. We did everything we set out to do, and my job was taken away from me wrongly. Your vote was stolen. My vote was stolen. The only way to reclaim it and to tell the people in Tallahassee that we as Democrats are in charge of this county is to reelect me and put me back in a position which I should have been with. This really isn't about Al Pollock or Greg Toney or Willie Jones or the other, quality men. This is about something taken away from me, an injustice, Dr. King said, and injustice anywhere is an injustice everywhere. I'm asking the community to put me back to where you elected me and give me an opportunity to continue to serve. Thank you.
Time, sir. Thank you. Next, we're going to go to Mr. Raymond L. Hicks.
Yes, first and foremost, Ms. Suzette, I want to thank you, the entire platform, as well as the brothers and sisters from the fraternity and sorority. I was a highly decorated officer prior to me going through the situation that I went through. They took something from me that I love, ma'am. As you can see, this is my Gold Cross Award here, you know, where I risked my life doing an armed carjacking. I was Deputy of the Month here, 1997. I was again Deputy of the Month, 1999. And of course, I won the Civil Cross Award for coming to the aid of a sergeant when I broke both of my hands protecting a sergeant. You know, I think it's unfortunate how these situations is transcending throughout our community when law enforcement, we're supposed to be the salt of the earth. We set the tone and the precedent, ma'am. There has to be transparency and accountability. And I'm very optimistic that things can be different if you put the right peoples in place. You know, when you look at some of these gentlemen that actually worked in law enforcement, you know, ask some of them about me, you know, and it's a shame, it's a disgrace, you know, that I sit here right now, ma'am, that not in law enforcement. Some of these guys are retired, I'm retired, but at the end of the day, I brought the situation to all these gentlemen's attention and not one of them said anything. So my question is, who policed the police? So again, I'm very involved in the community. You can check my record and you can see all the things that I do for the young kids in the community.
Time. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hicks. Next, we will go to Mr. H. Wayne Clark.
Thank you, Suzette, for hosting this tonight. Thank you for taking the time and listening to all of us in our positions. It's real simple. As Scott said, I'm a lawyer. I'm coming into the agency to run it like a business and clean things up. I'm getting rid of the bureaucracy and I'm going to fix the policies and procedures. I'm going to bring the morale back to the agency and I'm going to increase the training and I'm going to increase the overall community relations with every community in Broward County, because BSO touches every citizen in the county and it does more than law enforcement. It does way more than law enforcement. And I'm coming in there to make sure that we clean things up and be physically conservative when it comes to the budget and how we run the agency. Thank you very much.
You have 20 seconds. Any further response? If not, you'll yield.
No, I'll yield. Just thanks, you know, and thanks everyone for participating. You know, it's tough. We're all calling each other out on things, and as long as we all act like adults and stuff, we'll get through the process. So.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Clark, for those remarks. Next up is Sheriff Gregory Tony.
Yes, thanks, Suzette. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to the whole community who's paying attention to what we've been doing over the last 18 months. You know, this has been a very exciting time, regardless of how much controversy that's occurred and with the police brutality issues, as well as the things that they're looking at with COVID-19. When I came into this organization, I promised to promote from within. We have the most diverse command staff in over 105 years, which this community has been hoping for and praying for quite some time. We've expanded our training protocols, not just for active shooter preparedness, but to make sure we know how to treat people of color with the level of decency and respect that they deserve. We also built forth a true accountability and transparency process to hold our men and women accountable. We also reallocated millions of dollars to safeguard this community. I'm asking for the community's vote so I can continue to do the things that they have requested for and make sure that I safeguard not only this community, but the men and women who have served here for decades on end, because they deserve to continue to lead this organization. Thank you.
Thank you. And you're just about out of time. Thank you very much. Next, we're going to go to Mr. Charles Chuck Watley.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank everybody for participating in this debate, or this forum, how some people will call it. The reason why I am running for Broward County Sheriff, I had no political ambitions whatsoever. When I retired, I was going to leave. I was going to leave the state. I did my time. I served 4.5 years in the United States Marine Corps Infantry, did 28 years in law enforcement. Time for me to retire, go out in the country somewhere. No more violence. But after I saw the things that happened involving Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, I fought to have Scott Israel removed. I didn't like his policies. I fought against his policies when I was there. Then I was happy. But a week after I buried my father, what do I find? I find out the truth about Sheriff Tony. Every one of us, except for Wayne Clark, he's an attorney, the one thing that we have in common is that we earned that badge with honor. That means through truthfulness and honesty. We didn't falsify documents and so forth. He got his badge, his very first badge, based on fraud and the position based on fraud. So I am here to fight for truth. That's why I'm running for Broward County Sheriff. Haven't had truth in 30 years. It's time to have truth without political parties being involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watley. And last but most certainly not least, we will finish with Mr. Al Pollock.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Suzette, and also, to all your listeners and all the fraternities and the sororities, for having us. I know this community. I've served in this community for over 35 years. I was endorsed by the unions, police and fire rescue, because I have what it takes to take this agency forward and ensure fair justice for all and for a safer Broward County. If we're going to hold our men and women to higher standards, the leader have to be held to a higher standard as well. We can't expect differently from them, from the leader. I have no political issues or agenda. The BSO people have spoken, and I support our community to move forward with the changes required to protect them. That's BSO employees in Broward County community and the voters. And in closing, I have a relationship with our community, and I will continue to restore the integrity to the Broward Sheriff's Office. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and your time has elapsed. So again, we want to thank all of these courageous gentlemen, and it does take lots of courage to step out and lead an agency the size and scope of the Broward Sheriff's Office. We would like to thank all the candidates who accepted our invitation tonight, came prepared, and of course shared their views. And we thank you for your time again. Mr. Al Pollock, Mr. Charles Chuck Watley, Mr. H. Wayne Clark, thank you, Sheriff Tony, thank you, Raymond L. Hicks, thank you, Mr. Scott J. Israel, and thank you again, Mr. Willie Jones, for taking the time out to speak to the public tonight. We would like to remind you, as you see on your screen, we have 3 more wonderful forums coming up. So please do mark your calendars. We have Tuesday, June 23rd, Thursday, June 25th, as well as Tuesday, June 30th. We have all types of candidates. You can see them listed, from state attorney, public defender. Of course, we have judges, U.S. Congress people, school board members. These folks make the biggest difference on the local level, so we want to make sure we bring them to you in this type of forum. We want to thank our organizers again tonight. We want to thank the ladies of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, the Chi Psi Omega Chapter, as well as the Kappa Kappa Omega Chapters, as well as the illustrious ladies of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, North Broward Alumni Chapter. They're all illustrious. I'll make sure I'll say it. But once again, I would just like to mention it's the women at the forefront here trying to make sure the public stays informed. Thank you to all the ladies who helped put this forum together. We would like you to join us, of course, next week, same time, same place, here for Connect and Elect. I'm your host, Suzette Speaks. It's been my pleasure to be with you tonight. Again, leave your comments and we'll hopefully be able to send them directly to the candidates for them to respond if they didn't get to your question tonight. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again at our next forum.
Thank you, Suzette.
Have a great night. Bye, guys. Thank you.
God bless you.
Our pleasure.